I'm not really convinced that if you're a Marxist, you just have this goal of revolution and you should just try to affect the revolution. It's not really about affecting a revolution. It's about establishing some kind of concrete relationship to the people, first and foremost. And a revolution just might be an inevitable consequence of that. I mean, it will be an inevitable consequence. It's not something you voluntarily enact. A revolution is the result of an objective process of some kind. And the thing communists and Marxists are tasked with is making sense of reality for the people. Because that's actually not given. A lot of people assume that's given. It's not. It's really, I mean, Trump is, and all these strange things, these strange trends on the internet is proof that you can't take for granted how people are making sense of the world. So Marxism taps into something way more essential than just trying to voluntarily affect a revolution. It's not what Marxism is about. Marxism is about establishing a dialectical and concrete relationship between the most advanced and the lesser advanced. Theory, thought, and the people, right? This is really what Marxism is about, simplifying. I mean, Jimmy Dore is not really calling for the overthrow of the state, but he's clearly participating in the unfolding of an objectively revolutionary process of some kind. I think everyone can see that. It's why a lot of tankies really like Jimmy Dore. True. Revolution happens due to pre-existing contradictions. Very true, Bolshevik Blade. It's not something you voluntarily enact. It's something that is the culmination of an objective social revolution. Marxists do not introduce this social revolution. They attempt to clarify it. There's a really big difference, okay? That's why we, Infrared, like Jimmy Dore. He's an example of this objective kind of social revolution or movement or whatever you want to call it, that it's not premised by some voluntary act. It's just existing. It's the result of a pre-existing contradiction. I don't think Marxists should be so focused on revolution. We should accept it's inevitable. We shouldn't be scared of it. But the point is not voluntarily enacting some dramatic revolution, okay? It's more about being at peace with the fact that it is inevitable, and then at the right time, when it is time, and everything's in motion, like, you learn from the Bolshevik experience. When it's time, you'll be able to tell when it's time, like Lenin was able to. But it's not a voluntary act. It's just responding to some objective striving. Election. The inevitabilities in Marxism are all funded upon pre-existing contradictions, which is why revolution isn't exactly Bolshevik Blade. And one thing Western Marxists have a really tough time understanding is the dialectic of freedom and necessity, which is basically the fact that just because something is inevitable doesn't mean it doesn't warrant your participation, your full participation. There's Eastern ontologies understand the dialectic of determinism and free will or whatever, right? It's very clear, it's very evident, but Westerners have a really hard time with it, apparently. Subjective versus objective conditions. Yeah, revolution is a process. Revolution isn't always about killing people with guns and stuff. Yeah, that seems more like a fantasy, It's a fantasy. Fantasies maybe can't be bypassed, but I think my position on fantasies is that put your fantasies to work, Create things. Create beautiful works of art. Work with your fantasy. Put your fantasy to work. Don't take your fantasy for granted. Expand upon it. Water it. Take care of it. Cultivate it like a garden. That way you won't have to actually LARP in actual reality. Use your imagination and your fantasy to... It can be productive. It really can. The problem is when people try to make their fantasy reality. And that's what you call a nightmare. There's no need to be fixated on revolutions so much. Revolutions are things that happen very quickly. Political ones, I mean. They happen very quickly. They're never like this dramatic, beautiful. A revolution is, by the time a revolution is possible, everything's already in place anyway. So I don't think Marxists need to be worrying about a revolution. I think they need to be worrying about their relationship to the objective contradictions that might give rise to one. And so far, their relationship is more than unsatisfactory in countries like America and the West.